Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Buenas tardes. I'm Kristen Toll, and I'm a director in the Microsoft Research Connections team. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about doing community-developed translation models. So presently, there are 7,000 languages in the world. Over that, that's what experts tell us. But only 100 of them, actually fewer than 100 of them, are automatically translated from one language to another. And something that the UN tells us is that every 14 days, another language goes extinct. So what we're trying to do with the Microsoft Translator Hub project is try and stem the tide and be able to allow people to community source the creation of translation models in order to save those languages and preserve them for generations to come. I thought I'd start out the talk just covering a little bit of area about how you can include your community in developing a machine translation model. But just kind of to give you an overview, we have a lot of different interesting algorithms, statistical algorithms, that actually help us develop a machine translation model. And data is also a very key important ingredient in order for us to do that. Where I'm going to be focusing this talk today are in some interesting new developments we've done in this space, which are in domain-specific data and also doing domain-specific within target languages, and also enabling users to participate and vote and allow things to show up in the translator model system through the community. So how the system works is we take parallel data, and I'll explain that a little bit later about what parallel data is, and we combine that with data that we have inside of Microsoft. So if a translation model already exists, you can actually tap into Microsoft's big data and their translation models by bringing your small data to bear, but this allows you to actually build a more accurate model because you're actually able to leverage the models that we create. Monolingual data is data in the language that you want to be translating from. So for instance, if I want to go from Quechua to Spanish, or I want to go from Mayan, actually, or Maya to Spanish, what I would do is I would actually get a lot of data that we're targeting to do, such as Mayan. These go through a training system, which is supplemented by a testing and tuning set to check for accuracy. And then they feed into our contextual translation models that we provide. And this is a very high-level architecture diagram. I'm going to go into more detail on this later, so don't get nervous about this slide. This forms a model weight vector. And what that does is input, which can be text, speech, video, even images, goes in one. This creates the decoder that translates from one language to another. And out the other side, you get a translation. So I thought what I'd do is I'd show you one of the early community sources systems that we have. And we've been working with the Lake Washington School District. And that school district has about 25 or 30 different languages within the school, where children in the home are exposed to one language, but at the schools, they're actually exposed to another language, which is English. But it's important for parents who maybe don't have English as a first language to understand what's going on with the school district. So what we've done is we've collaborated with them to provide a system that would automatically translate their page. So if you scroll down in this page, you'll actually see at the bottom that they can translate it into Spanish. And if we do that, what we can do is we can select from, there's actually 37 languages that we support. I've got Hmong Daw selected there because that's the newest language that we've supported, and it was a community-developed language. But what I'm going to do is actually convert that into Spanish. So now you can see that we actually convert it over, but this isn't something that we do in a vacuum. What we want to do is we want to get people involved. And I can also translate it back here at the bottom. But what we do is we let people go into the system, and they can actually improve the translation by going, right-clicking on it, and then they can suggest a better translation if they think that this one is not appropriate. And we've tapped into the parent community for the children in the Lake Washington School District to help us make sure that this page remains accurate. And we incent people by showing leaderboards, like who submits more translations than others. So they kind of compete together, these parents, they compete against one another to submit translations and make corrections. So in the Lake Washington School District, we have, and these are the people that we've tapped to be what we call community leaders. And the largest portion are actually Spanish. We have more Spanish speaking people in the Lake Washington School District who are making corrections to the page. And what we've found is that we can show them the rewards, get them to compete against one another, but reward them instantly for their contributions. But the most telling thing that we think is that none of the community, because they take a personal pride in the models that we're developing, there's been no spamming, and we have no expectation that there would be. This is something that we were concerned about, but it actually has not happened. So even pages that don't have our little widget embedded on it, we can translate. So I'm running this in Internet Explorer, and all I have to do here is a right-click on it, and you see I get this menu bar that comes up and says Translate with Bing. And then I get this, and I can auto-detect what it is, and then, which is Spanish in this case, and I can convert that to English. So now you can actually see that this page has been converted into English. So it's a little bit hard to read at the top, so I decided I'd slide it down a bit so you can see this is where you can actually have the settings, which are at the top of the page. You can actually see that you can translate it between Spanish or any other language that we presently support. So what do we do about these languages, these other 69,000 languages, or 6,900 languages that we don't support? What do we do in those cases? Well, what we do is we tap into the community. And I thought I would actually provide you with a quote from John Ralston Saul. The best way to shut down freedom of speech is the loss of a language. And so it's very important for us to make sure that we preserve these languages. I was recently in Nepal running a workshop trying to preserve the Nepali language. And one of the things that was very shocking to me, we saw these children playing out in the soccer field, and they were shouting to one another in English. And if you go to school, the kids are actually punished if they speak Nepalese to one another. So at the college level, many of the university students who went to our workshop were not fluent in Nepalese. And the reason is their parents believe that it's better for them to learn English or some other major language as opposed to speaking Nepalese. So they've literally, in country, losing their own language. So it's, and there's no way, Jaime, who's the chair of this event, and I were talking about this, there's no way to truly express yourself except in your mother tongue. Like that's the only way you can really, truly express yourself. And I mean, we can get close with translations, but really, what comes from the heart, what comes from inside, has to be in the mother tongue. So what the Translator Hub does is it enables companies, it enables organizations, language communities, educators to build custom, private, domain-specific, web-accessible automatic translation models. We literally are enabling people, stepping out of the way, allowing people to build these translation models themselves. When I say custom, that means it could be for any language, even languages that we don't presently support, even pairs of languages between two languages that we don't support. Private means that it belongs to the community, it's developed in private, and when the community feels like releasing it and deploying it, then it gets deployed. It's the ownership really lives with the community leader who signs up to do one of these languages. And web accessible, it runs on Azure. And so it's accessible anywhere in the world. It's a web service that runs in Azure. So when we ran the workshop, we ran it live against the system in Nepal and Kathmandu with questionable connectivity, but it worked very well, actually, for our training event. But what it does is, ultimately, it empowers users to take a hold of this. It sort of takes it out of the hands, say, of a large company and puts it into the hand of communities. And as I say, it's a free web service. We don't charge for you to develop the translation models. And that it leverages, as I had said before, you bring your small data. If it's a language that we support, you can tap into our big data models. And that means you get more accuracy more quickly. And we have all kinds of APIs and guides and even how-to videos on the website to show you how to use it. We support SOAP, AJAX, HTTP, and OData interfaces. So this is Dr. Peng Yang, and he was one of our alpha testers. This is before even beta. These guys really put us through the paces in trying to develop Hmong Daw. But working with his community, it took about 6 months, working with his community, but they actually were able to release their language on Bing on International Mother Languages Day, which was February 21st of this year. So this is a proof point of a case where a community developed the model, decided as a community that it was ready to ship, and then they shipped it. I mean, no translation model is going to be perfect, not from the outset. But the thing is language is a living thing, and it changes over time. If you give ownership to the community, that language evolves. And so you're continuing to improve it over time, and it's the community itself that has ownership and pride in what it is that they develop. So we also like to acknowledge people. So since they did the work, we didn't do the work, they did the work. What we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that people in the world knew that they did the work. So what we do is off these different language models that we translate, we provide a place for them to be acknowledged for their hard work, so that people know in the world that this was done not by Microsoft, but this was done by the Hmong community. And so this is one of the landing pages that we have there. We're currently working on for Nepalese as well. And if you want to read more about it in Spanish, there is a blog that's out there. Of course, this was written in English, but I used the translator to convert it to Spanish. But you're more than welcome to go find out more about that and use the Bing translator to convert it. So this is the landing page that people get sent to. And this is an invitation-only site. So you do have to request an invitation in order to use it. The reason for this is we don't want just random people sending things. It's kind of like the Lake Washington School District. We want to make sure that you're serious about it, because this is actually taking compute time, not only on our Azure web service, but the high-performance computing cluster where we build the statistical training models in order to have translation models developed. So it's important that we make sure that people have a plan, what they're going to try to do, and you can do more than one model once you've been invited. The sky's the limit, and I'll show you how many languages we support. And it's quite easy. It's a very easy step-by-step process. And again, we have guides that help you along the way. But it's setting up the project, adding your data, creating the model, and then just going live. Of course, the devil is in the details. So I thought what I would do is I would show you some screenshots of that. I was going to do a live demo, but unfortunately my internet is up and down, and I thought that would be a mistake. I didn't want to have any technical difficulties. So for instance, what I would do once I've logged into the system is I would create a project. There's a drop down up here that says create project. I'd select it. And so for this example, I thought, well, let's do the Mayan preservation project and go to local Yucatan Mayan languages, because there are actually several groups. There's 6 groups that are spread geographically across South America, Central America, and Mexico. So I picked one actually that's local to this area, which is Maya or Moipam. And you can do it to English, or you can do it to many other languages. In here, we actually have almost 1,300 languages of which you can select from. Now, earlier I said that there were 7,000 languages spoken in the world, but those languages are largely spoken languages. They're not text-based. So this particular version supports text. But in the case, for instance, like Hmong was a language that was also a spoken language, not a written language. So what they did is they developed a language, and it's been around for long enough, 60 years now. But they developed a language to map to that in order to be able to put it here. But for instance, I could go for, I'd said English before, but now if I want, maybe I want to go between Maya and Spanish, I can do that here. The other thing that's really interesting, and I said this earlier, custom domain-specific models. So whenever you're building a model, Bing is a general purpose model. It can map to all kinds of things, but the accuracy perhaps is not as high as you would want if you were doing a very specific thing, like if you were going to be doing anthropology, or if you wanted to be doing chemicals. What I find actually, there's been a lot of interest, particularly from the Gates Foundation, is agriculture. They want to develop agricultural information so they can help farmers around the world share best practices with one another. So there's a lot of socially relevant things that can be done by isolating the models. You still can tap into the big models that we have, but the data that you upload can be very customized, which means that the accuracy of the translation model that you build could be higher. So education is another one, and we find a lot of educators have already got translated data, so they're great candidates for doing a specific translation model, particularly if you pick a specific domain of education. So when after you've selected your project, you arrive here. You can either add files for training right away if you're just going to just do that, you're not going to invite the community, or you can also invite your community owners and co-owners. The nice thing about having co-owners is that means more than one person is responsible for using the system. So typically we set up co-owners as people who are sort of your committee, your group in your community that you want to have be responsible for the model. But you can also invite communities in a less trusted role to just be reviewers, and they can submit translations, but they can't approve them. And I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. So here's where I would upload my data. This one I'm actually uploading a file for Spanish so that it can go into the system for training. And I thought what I would do here is pause and talk about a little bit about what parallel documents are. Most people don't have a good grasp of this, and they also don't realize that they have a lot of them. So for instance, if I just hunt around the Microsoft site. So here's one that's on Discovering Internet Explorer 9. But we've also paid money to have it translated into Spanish. So this is a truly parallel document. It has the exact same content, but what you can do is you can upload them both, and this is a parallel file. And a lot of times, like people say, well, do they have to be in the same file? They don't. We actually intentionally put them in separate file because typically you don't put them in the same file. So one HTML page, which is one of the file formats that we support, can be mapped to another HTML page. The only thing is that the first part of the name has to be the same. So one of the things I was telling you about, we're tapping into the Microsoft models. You do that by selecting here. It is on by default that you can access our models on the back end, your small data combined with it. However, if you're really looking for something extremely custom, you could actually tick this off, right? And so you don't actually have to use it. We make it an option. But we do add it because it does tend to increase blue scores. What's most important is this tuning and testing. If you're doing a domain-specific model, you want to make sure that the files that you upload for tuning and testing accurately reflect the domain that you're trying to build. So this particular file is one that's very much a representative sample. If this were, say, for chemistry or anthropology, this file should be targeted. It should have data that's very specific to that particular domain. And that's both for tuning and testing. So once I've drafted a training, it shows up in my overall heads-up display for this particular training thing. Once it's drafted, I can then choose whether or not to run it. If it runs successfully, it will say succeeded. If it doesn't, it says failed. Typically, that's because I don't have enough data in the system. Don't worry, just add more data. It's quite easy to fix. Once something has been succeeded, it can then be deployed. And once deployed, your community can then start working on it, improving it, making it function better. So I had to switch to Hmong. I didn't have a Maya. I didn't have data to build a Maya in Spanish translator. So I have to switch to one of the ones I do have deployed, which is Hmong. And it's interesting here to see that how is the weather, and you see it translated here into Hmong. I don't speak Hmong either, so don't worry about that. That's not the point of the slide. But if I go out to Bing, you'll notice it's different. It's actually slightly different. And the reason is because in our tool, you'll get multiple different types. So for instance, in this listing, the community has submitted 3 different ways to say this sentence. And they're all right. There's not one of them that's wrong, because they've all got a blue ribbon next to them. That means some reviewer went in and said, yep, these are all acceptable. And the reason for that is in different contexts, a sentence might mean different things. And so what we're trying to do is provide all of the different possible options that it could be. But the one that succeeded is this one here at the top. So data really is the key to translation quality. You need to have a minimum of 10,000 parallel sentences in order for you to build a translation model. That's actually really not a lot of data. And particularly if you're an educator and you've built all of these websites, you often have that data lying around, but you just don't realize it. Books, for instance, we work a lot with publishers. They pay a lot of money to translate their books. And what they'd like to do is be able to then translate their online properties using these very custom models. And that works extremely well. And they have hundreds of thousands, even millions of sentences available. But you can access the system through our API that I talked about earlier, HTTP, SOAP, AJAX, and OData. You can embed the widget like we did in the Lake Washington School District example that I showed you earlier. This is where you can gather community inputs there, but you can also gather community inputs from using the Microsoft Translator Hub. There's a UI where you saw them against one another. Users can submit translations there. This goes into a collaborative translation memory. And then we get 100% match at the runtime. The trained models come out, and you get parallel training data. And this is and also in association, we build off your target training data. So the community gets an immediate reward. They get immediate credit in a leadership board. We show who's leading the charge. And then they get immediate validation and ranking. And that was where I was showing which ones, three things were submitted. The top one was the one that gets the highest ranking and validation. So collaboration is the key to vitality. So data may be the key to building the translation model. Collaboration is really how you keep it vibrant, how you keep it evolving. And so, what you want to do is you want to get a lot of really good parallel data that's from within a domain from your community. You can achieve the higher quality by using tapping into Microsoft's big data models. And then the Microsoft Translator widget collects data also from your community. And in order to build the best system possible, you can use the Translator Hub. Oops, I did the wrong thing there. There we go. So I thought what I would do is I would wrap this up with a new tool that we've just recently come out with that's driven by the Microsoft Translator system. This system is called your Mobile Travel Companion. And it runs on any Windows mobile phone. What it allows you to do is, Rick Rashid's a big Star Trek fan, so I couldn't help, to boldly go where no man has gone before. So quite literally, it does translation of speech. It even does live video. It does text and images, which is really incredible. It uses OCR to take that in. And it uses automatic translation and human-aided, so if you have your friends, they can actually help you as well. They can make corrections along the way. So friends in your social network can also make corrections. It uses smarts. It knows where you are. So for instance, it knows right now that I'm in Cancun, and so it operates differently here than it would if I were in the United States. So if I have my location turned on my phone, it actually can rely on that to tell me what's the location I'm in and the context I'm in. And it's been implemented as a Windows Phone application. Literally, it could be speech, text, and even the signs. And if you come by the booth, I have a DemoFest booth for both of these particular projects, so I invite you to come by and check it out. But it takes that video, speech, and text, sends it to the phone, and then it also interacts with Facebook. Facebook uses our translator as well. And then through the translator, it comes out again as video, speech, and text. This is important. So if I take a picture of a sign and I want to know how it's pronounced in Chinese, what I can do is take that picture of that sign, or maybe the sign's in Chinese, but I want to hear it in English because I don't speak Chinese. What I can do is I can say, output it to speech, and then my phone will literally say what the phrase is that's on that particular sign. So it's quite handy to have when you're traveling. So what it looks like is this. When you load the system, you come in and it shows you a startup page. There's a keyboard, camera, voice. So literally the camera on your phone is where you can capture images. So it's asking you what is the input that you're going to be using. And then over here is where you actually select which languages that you want to translate between. One of the things that's really nice about this is you can do just right away, type something in, how are you, ¿cómo está? If I have images, I take a picture of it. Immediately, it overlays the text right over there. This is a case of where I want text output, so I've got an overlay in English from Chinese, which I don't speak. And then if I want, I can even speak into it and have it translate. So maybe I speak English and I want someone to hear it in their language. I could speak into my phone, and it would speak it back out in the language that they need it to hear in. So one of the most important things about this tool is, well, we're not always connected to the internet, and it can be very hard to want to do this. You may have more connectivity when you roam or travel like I do. You don't want to pay the data charges. So it's quite easy to actually download some of these phrase books to your phone itself, so that when you're offline or even in airplane mode, you can still access all the functionality that you've seen here. So in this case, I'm actually downloading a French language one. I'm going to come down, and it's now been succeeded. It's now in my system, but I want to view some of the other ones that I've got. So as you can see, I have 5 of them in my phone that I can access, and all of these are available offline. All the functionality that I told you about is available offline to users. So this is downloadable from the Windows Phone Marketplace, not just the English site, but also on our site for Mexico. So you're free to go there and download it and test it out. It shipped earlier this year. Are there any questions? Wow, quite fast. It's funny because I had so many slides, I was thinking, oh, I'm going to be over. Yes?
Hi. You mentioned that the phone could be offline. These applications could be
Yes.
offline. Gracias. What about the a server? I mean, for example, Mayan, a school that does not have any connectivity or internet connection, or is not as good as it should be.
Sure.
Do they have options to work offline?
For the hub or for the mobile?
For the hub.
Yeah, the hub is not offline.
Okay.
Yeah, you do need to have connectivity at least regularly. The nice thing about it is it's extremely fault tolerant because it's built on Azure. When we were in Nepal, the internet would drop out. It would cycle up and down about every, I don't know. Sometimes it was every 5 minutes. Other times it was every half hour. The thing is the system keeps your state.
Okay.
So IE is very good about keeping your state. I'm sure most other browsers are as well, but we were using IE in this particular case. So even though the internet had gone away and the model had gone away, the moment that we were back online, the people who were doing reviews, submitting translations, using the system, were able to pick up exactly where they left off. They had no problem at all, actually, just interacting with the system. They would get an error the moment that it occurred. They could resubmit, and then it would go through.
Okay.
So state is maintained within the browser by the way in which we implemented the UI for this system.
Okay, but that's for the hub. But then if you already have the information in the server, you can download a subset to
Yes.
your phone, right?
You can.
For a classroom, for example.
Yes, absolutely.
No, you can build materials, educational materials, in Mayan, Spanish, and you
Yes.
can download it to the phones.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I want to try it.
Okay, no problem. You can try it.
Hi, I would like to ask about the categories or domains. Are they built in, or can they be modified? For example, if I choose to enter a new category, I haven't seen, I don't know, the field to add one more.
You can request that we add another one. In fact, I'm glad you asked this question because there's something I failed to mention earlier in my talk. So the domains are presently fixed in the system, but you can request one. There's a link there to request it just below the domain. But in addition to that, there's also a link to request new languages. So even though there's 1,300 in there, these things actually can be changed. In addition, for domain-specific ones, you can further isolate it on your own. So while the category list may be fixed for when you start, and maybe we haven't added it yet, what you can do is you can actually, there's a box directly below it that allows you to type in your own domain. So we think these areas are at a very high level. So for instance, I think one of them is sports. That's fine. But sports is a very broad thing, right? Education is a very broad thing. It's too broad. So what you can do is you can further classify it by adding something into that field that says, okay, this is education, but maybe it's going to be about mathematics. This is education, it's going to be about physics. So you can automatically, with the system, right as you create the project, perform a more subclassification directly in the UI at the project's creation. No, they don't, actually. So the question was, for those of you who don't have, didn't hear, is do the parallel documents have to be sentence by sentence? We do have a sentence mapping tool inside of the system because there's no way, like with Hmong, the reason why there's so many different translations for one single sentence is because, and they're all correct, right? All the reviewers had gone through, selected them, and said they were all correct, is that in different contexts, things are different. And the other thing is sometimes the way in which you express something in one language is ordered differently, not just within the sentence, but even paragraphically. And so what we try to do is we try to match them up. We have a mapping algorithm to map between the sentences by looking at individual words that we know are accurately, we have a dictionary lookup, and so then we can map the sentence, even if it appears before or after, to the appropriate translation in the other language.
Sorry to be so.
No, it's fine.
But what is could you explain this, something very basic, because I get this question a lot. What is the difference between this kind of translator hub and a typical dictionary, word by word? I mean, what's the real breakthrough in this kind of technology?
Well, one of the things is that even in a book, it remains fixed. Yeah. That's the problem. What we're trying to do, really, ultimately, and so I'm very glad that you've asked this question, is to try and capture this language, that it's not a moving target. Language is living. It's a very living thing. And you can get these books provide snapshots. What they don't do is you have to do another revision. It takes a long time for it to print. Do another revision. It takes a long time to print. For an automatic translation system, there needs to be no delay. They can automatically be fixed very quickly. And so every time the model is redeployed, if you deploy it yourself privately, then all the changes that you made are resident immediately in that private model. For shipping it in Bing, that takes some time. They go through a process. That's a periodic thing. But for your private model that you own yourself, the changes are instantaneous. And so that evolution of language can be easily updated all of the time. And maybe it's, it happens a little at a time. It's also very hard to do it as an undertaking, as a big thing. It's much easier if your community is making corrections as they go. And the other thing is, you think about it, one person typically creates, or a couple of people usually create dictionary lookups and phrase books. But tapping into the community is probably the best way to do it quickest and keep it more accurate over time. I mean, crowdsourcing is just really ultimately the best way to go. So that's, I hope I answered your question. Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much.